Welcome back to Simplifying the State. I'm Adam Watson.
And I'm Nicholas Parham.
Okay, so today we have a little bit of a special episode. So it's special for two reasons. The first one is this is not our weekly episode. This is sort of a breaking-ish topic episode. And the second one is we're going to be pursuing, in the usual episodes, we kind of have a nonpartisan, factual, informative format. In this one, it's going to be basically like an opinion piece, but in podcast form. So we're going to be sharing our opinions on the issue. Obviously, we're still going to keep it like civil and all that stuff, but this will be a more opinion-centered episode. Okay, so the thing we're going to be talking about today is the press conference which just occurred between not former, but President Trump, currently Vice President J.D. Vance, and then Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, and kind of how that might tie into future U.S. Ukrainian relations. Okay, so I think just out of the bat, I think this press conference for both sides was just an unmitigated disaster. I mean, it broke down into a shouting match between the U.S. president, the Ukrainian president, and the U.S. vice president. Nicholas, what do you think?
I watched it, and even though it was only like 5 minutes long, I found it really hard to watch. Like you could tell just how much fire there was on really each side. But I felt it especially from Zelensky. I think overall he kept it pretty well. Considering the situation. But even so, there was a lot of talking over each other. In the beginning of the video, I couldn't tell who instigated it, but in the second portion of it, Zelensky started talking, then Trump started talking over, and they just kept fighting for dominance. And eventually, I think Zelensky relented. But yeah, it was awful.
All right, so I mean, the overall whole thing wasn't super short. These things are usually quite long, but the part in particular was pretty short. So from what I saw, it seems like J.D. Vance might have been the one who instigated it. I mean, at least that's what it seemed like from where the part I watched started. So it seems like it was instigated when Zelensky and J.D. Vance were kind of disagreeing on the discussion of security guarantees. Zelensky was there to sign a mineral agreement between the United States and Ukraine. We can talk about that more in depth, maybe next episode or maybe later on. But basically, it was a deal that was struck either to pay the U.S. back for the aid provided or to guarantee it in the future. That kind of seemed the point of it was kind of not very clear because Zelensky was saying that we want this to be sort of we give you this and then in the future you continue to give us military aid. Trump seems to be more of we gave you all this military aid, so we want $500 billion worth of natural resources from your country. Nicholas, what do you think?
Yeah, that thing of coming from Trump that you owe us is definitely the vibe that I saw. Not only with the mineral agreement, but with just that whole discussion in general. One of the things that Trump was saying, kind of repeatedly throughout it, was, "You're not thankful. You've thanked nothing. I have not. I've." It might have been Vance that said this
Yeah, it was
specifically,
Vance who
but
said that.
yeah, you have not thanked us for anything, and like yeah, that vibe of it being you owe us is just super strong through that, and it feels you know that Trump is just trying to get get back what the US gave to Ukraine instead of continued US support for Ukraine, even though that is what Trump claims to be offering here.
Right, right. I think it's important to before we continue, it's important to do a little bit of a history lesson. So, at the end of the Cold War, Ukraine had some 1,900 nuclear warheads in its territory. They were not Ukrainian warheads; they were Soviet warheads that were stationed in Ukraine. during the collapse of the Soviet Union, very chaotic. The Soviets didn't really have time to get them back before the Union was dissolved by Gorbachev. So the Ukrainians had 1,900 nuclear warheads. The Russians wanted them back, because that consisted not a small chunk of their arsenal. Uh, so Ukraine didn't want to give them up, however, because they were concerned of a future Russian invasion into their territory. And so they wanted to keep them for, basically as a card to hold up their sleeves in case the Russians ever did try to, which, looking back may have been a smart idea given what has now transpired. But the Ukrainians signed a deal with the U.S. saying that, and the Russians saying that we will give these warheads back. In exchange, the U.S./West will guarantee our independence and our sovereignty. We had a deal with Ukraine that we would do that if they gave up those nuclear warheads, and it seems like at the start of the war, we kind of break that agreement that we had with them. Obviously, it was sort of a iffy document. It wasn't really binding like NATO membership is, but it was like a basic understanding that we would defend your sovereignty if you were invaded by the Russians, if you gave up these nuclear warheads. And so this kind of seems to me, at least in my opinion, like a betrayal of the Ukraine to the Ukrainians by the U.S. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that does sum up the situation pretty well. However, I think it is important to note that that document was like also signed by the Russians, and it was
Right,
more of a agreement of territorial integrity of Ukraine more than anything.
right.
So yes, the document was iffy, and technically it was broken in 2014 when
Russia
um,
invaded Crimea, right?
yes, exactly. And I feel like the U.S. response in 2022 was, I think it was like, I personally believe that it was the like most balanced and pragmatic response
No,
because
definitely. Yeah,
yeah, because Russia has all those nukes
right.
and they were operational.
Right. Obviously, I'm not advocating that we should have like gone into Ukraine, guns blazing, B-2 Spirit bomber overhead. Obviously, no. But yeah, I feel like the response that the U.S. had after the Russian invasion of just mustering the world and just providing them with the military equipment that they needed to defend their sovereignty, that sort of upheld our agreement with them that their territorial integrity and their sovereignty would be protected, and that seems to me like that was the best approach to deal with that, because obviously war between NATO and Russia could very easily turn nuclear, and nobody wants that. Not Putin doesn't want that, even though he seems as though he's threatened nukes on the battlefield, but he doesn't really probably want that. Moving to Putin, though, real quick, Trump said something that I found very interesting, which was that, he talked about with Ukraine, and I'm paraphrasing here, but basically he said, you have a lot of hostility and hatred towards Putin. I don't know if I want to make a deal with a man who has such hatred and hostility. He also said shortly after the conference, he said basically that Zelensky doesn't want to make peace while Putin does. This is something he suggested uh, on the South Lawn, a little bit after the press conference. Nicholas, what do you think about this? Because it seems like Trump has kind of broken away from Ukraine and now seemingly moving closer to Russia, the aggressor in this war, which Trump said that, suggested that Ukraine may have started the war, and then it was sort of clarified, but it's also been kind of iffy on whether the Trump administration thinks that. What do you think?
Well, I think that like, yeah, with what you were saying about Trump getting closer to Putin's Russia in his second term, especially. I mean, we also saw like evidence of this and like this actually happening in his first term as well, although it was nowhere near to the point where it is now. Trump right now is definitely favoring Russia more in like these peace talks, which on the surface level makes sense because Russia is like, if you look at a map, Russia is winning. They have territory in Ukraine much larger than Ukraine has territory in Russia. However, again, uh, Trump is favoring the aggressor in this, and since Trump is favoring a aggressive dictator in this war, if there is a similar war in the future, with a similar situation, then will he do much the same thing?
Right, right. I mean, I think this kind of sends a signal around the world, not just uh, to Europe, where I bet Putin was probably paying a close eye and probably loving every second of this press conference, because now he is seeing that, oh, well, maybe now I can invade the NATO countries, and maybe he won't want to get involved in that. Or maybe China's looking now and saying, well, he seems to maybe not want to have the U.S. in such a interventionist position, and so maybe I can invade Taiwan and not really suffer a lot of consequences. Obviously, there would probably be economic consequences, but I mean, that kind of seems like a signal that may have been sent, either intentionally or unintentionally. So basically, a recap of what was said. Obviously, there was very heated back and forth. Uh, Trump stated that the Ukrainians weren't in a very good position. He said, quote, "You're right now not really in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards." Uh, and then Zelensky said, "I'm not playing cards." Trump then raised his voice and said, "You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III." Obviously, there was talk about uh, if Zelensky was being respectful. Vance accused him of being disrespectful. He said, quote, "Have you said thank you once during this entire meeting?" So obviously, it was a very heated discussion between these two. I've seen some pieces which think this may have been staged, and it may have been an ambush for Zelensky. What do you think?
Like if it was an ambush for Zelensky?
Right. So they were suggesting, and I'm not sure, but they were suggesting that perhaps this was what Trump and Vance wanted, was to get into this heated exchange with Zelensky. That's at least what I saw.
Well, I have not heard this, and I have not heard any arguments supporting it. And like just thinking about it right now, like to me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense because, like, um, I mean, I guess it makes sense from like if Trump and Vance are trying to portray um like Zelensky as sort of a weak figure and uncooperative, but even still, like Trump and Vance would be seen and are very clearly like the perpetrators of this, like shouting at match, and it just, I don't know, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense why they would
Yeah,
want
yeah,
to
yeah.
do this.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. Like, to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, I can see some potential reasons for their maybe wanting to do that, but from a larger, like U.S. foreign policy stance, it doesn't make much sense to throw away a very strategic relationship like that. Uh, okay, so here's the thing about like the way this can like play into the larger European thing. So, do you think after this, Europe may step up its aid even more? I mean, obviously they have given a lot of aid. They've given Europe as a whole, in terms of like uh, dollar amounts, USD has given more than we have. Do you think that they may step up even more aid now that the US seems to be a sort of maybe unreliable partner in this?
That's certainly a possibility. I think that some European nations might think of this endeavor as now a sunk expenditure, and some European nations might not have the funds to continue supporting Ukraine, namely the UK. However, countries like Poland, I think, would be like very willing to step up in lack of the U.S. to support Ukraine in this. I think those countries will absolutely step up and help support, especially against a more aggressive U.S. And I think that that would also be an opportunity for them to improve their weapons, tactics, and whatever else they may need to fend off Russia in the advent of a sleeper United States.
Right. Okay, so just kind of looking at just kind of European leaders' responses, most of the European responses have been either pro like Ukraine or kind of, we're gonna seek a diplomatic thing. So Macron said, quote, there is an aggressor, which is Russia, and an attacked people, which is Ukraine. Uh, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer was a spokesperson said he spoke to both Trump and Zelensky today. He said, quote, he retains his unwavering support for Ukraine and is playing his part to find a path forward to a lasting peace based on sovereignty and security for Ukraine. The top diplomat for the EU said in a statement, quote, it's clear that the free world needs a new leader. Uh, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, a key Trump ally in Europe, proposed holding a summit with the U.S. and European leaders to discuss the war in Ukraine. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk said, "Dear Zelensky, dear Ukrainian friends, you are not alone." Spanish Prime Minister said Spain stands with them. Lithuania, Estonia, Hungary, uh, Hungary stood with the U.S. president, saying, quote, strong men make peace, weak men make war. Today, President Trump stood bravely for peace, even if it was difficult for many to digest. So, the typical responses you would see from the typical nations, obviously Hungary and Trump, well, Orban and Trump seem to have a pretty good relationship. Uh, what do you think of the European leaders' responses?
I mean, I think it was largely expected. Like now that I think about it, I should have expected the new UK Prime Minister to support Ukraine as he had been for like even before his time in office, and yeah, the large support and unwavering support for Ukraine to me is very it's expected and it's
Right,
heartwarming as well.
right.
And it's good to see European solidarity in the face of potential U.S. abandonment of Europe, which might be what we see, unfortunately.
Right. Obviously, the Europeans recognize that it's in their own uh, national security interest to make sure Ukraine either wins this war or is not totally annexed by Russia. Because, let's be honest here. Putin, he wants to reconstitute the Soviet Union. He said that. He wants to remake the Soviet Union slash Russian Empire. He, if he takes Ukraine, then pretty much all he has left bordering him is Belarus, some Caucasus nations in the south, and then the rest of them are NATO members. And the NATO members in Europe,
And Central Asia.
well, yeah, Central Asia, but the Soviet Union didn't really lose any land in Central Asia. Well, okay, wait,
What? What are
no,
you
no, no.
on about?
I thought you said Far East Asia. Obviously, yeah, Turkmenistan. I'm tripping. No, obviously they lost Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, most of the stands. Uh, but yeah, they recognize that it is important for them to stand with Ukraine because if not, the next country Russia comes for could be one of those NATO members, and if the U.S. Kind of seems like they're not gonna defend Europe from possible Russian aggression, then that then means that they're on their own. And I think they're probably concerned about how they can win that war because they do not have the modern weapons that Western Europe has, and now Eastern Europe is getting its hands on. Like Poland, they're ramping up their military exponentially, but they have a lot of manpower that they can just throw at the enemy, and they have a lot more troops. And
I would like to say though, they don't have as many troops as you might think.
They
Because
don't
their
have this.
recruitment
Yeah,
numbers are low and their birth rate is in the gutter.
right,
They
right, right.
really can't sustain this war or any war long term now.
Right, right. I mean, obviously, they don't have like Soviet Union, World War II mass charge doctrine numbers here, but they still have a large amount of troops that they can pull from, at least temporarily. I mean, obviously, if the casualties seen in Ukraine, I think it was like 700,000 soldiers and civilians like killed or wounded now. I think that was the number. But if, I mean, obviously, if the Russians saw something close to that in their war against Europe, obviously they wouldn't be able to sustain that for long. They couldn't probably even sustain this uh, war for long with their equipment deficits, and obviously both sides are bleeding manpower now. Obviously, Ukraine will probably run out first, given that they have a smaller population. But yeah, what do you think?
I mean, yeah, like long term, like in a long drawn out war between Russia and Ukraine, even with like Western support to Ukraine, I think if like China ramps up its, well, I guess they don't have. If China starts aiding Russia, like with a lot of equipment, then I think eventually Russia will come out on top. But the issue then will not be like trying to one up NATO since then. It'll be trying to contain Ukraine because Ukraine, even now, is still a very populous country with very like resilient people who would not be too kind to Russian occupation.
Right. So yeah, I don't see this war ending even if Russia were to take Ukraine. I think they would launch a guerrilla campaign and all that stuff. It would be a complete nightmare and disaster for Russia. I don't think, obviously, in his perfect world, I'm sure Putin would like to annex all of Ukraine, and he'd like to annex all of Eastern Europe, and maybe even take all of Western Europe. I'm sure he wants to do that. My guess is that right now he's looking at his options, and he's probably guessing that the most he can get is to hold on to the land that he's taken so far and to reconstitute that into his Russian empire or whatever he's trying to make, and then take all its take all the land is worth, take all the people and conscript them into the military, and take all the resources and all that stuff. That's what I see as the most likely Russian victory. Is they hold on to the land that they have right now, and then they just take it for all it's worth, and then maybe in 5 years, if the US continues to pursue a more isolationist policy than it has in the past when it comes to Europe, maybe roll into the Baltics and cut off the corridor between Poland and Lithuania and try to take the Baltics.
Yeah, and the longer this war goes on for Russia, I think especially if it gets to that point that Russian industry is not enough, I think Russia will become more and more of a Chinese partner, even amounting potentially to like dependent on China to maintain their like integrity and Putin's integrity as the leader of Russia, because who knows how popular Putin really is in Russia right now, and
Right.
especially if this war goes on much longer.
Right. I mean, the Russians do have a history of removing leaders after unpopular wars, Afghanistan, World War One, etc. I mean, the Gorbachev was like a whole different, was a whole series of events, not really him specifically, but and they didn't really remove him. The like Soviet hardliners did, but anyway, yeah. I mean, China's been playing this very close to the chest. They are not really wanting to side with either, mostly because of trade relations. Obviously, they like Putin more than they like the United States, so obviously they're gonna be more friendly to him. But I'm not sure they're gonna be full on sending him tanks and all that stuff yet. I think that but I mean that might be something that happens as a result of possible U.S. withdrawal from the world stage. I mean, if China feels like there will not be massive consequences if it were to do that, send Russia weapons, then I think that they may be emboldened to do so. What do you think?
Yeah, pretty much what you said. Like, I think China will like get more comfortable with sending aid to Russia if like Trump continues his friendly policies to Russia. It's uncertain whether he'll continue that, like have that same sort of dynamic with China in this, especially in the case of an invasion of Taiwan. But yeah, I think that if the U.S. grows more friendly with Russia and subsequently China, then there could be like a new world order,
Right.
in a manner of speaking.
Right. Yep. All right. Well, thank you for listening to Simplifying the State. This was slightly different than what we usually do, but I think it was a pretty productive conversation. Tune in next time for our next episode. See you then.